Hi, everyone. Welcome to the first meeting in June. I can't believe it's already June. Today, I think we have a special guest, Daniel. Daniel, I think you said you've been a longtime Glue user, so maybe I'll pass the mic to you to introduce yourself. The reason I'm inviting Daniel to the call is not only you are a very long time Glue user, you've probably been using Glue before me, and also you are also looking at kgateway and interested in move to kgateway when you have some more time later this year. So Daniel, I'm going to pass the mic to you.
Okay. I'm Daniel Shackelford. I'm a senior software engineer at an organization called Ithaca. We use Kubernetes for our platform, and we started building our platform in 2018. And at some point, we knew that we needed to have a better way of managing our endpoints that are exposed to the internet. We use Fastly. And so we evaluated traffic and Kong, Glue, Gateway at the time, maybe it was Edge, I can't remember what it was. It was Glue to us. And in 2020, we actually started using Glue. And so it's been our primary way of exposing our applications to Fastly, which then handles our CDN and caching and things like that. But one of the reasons why we actually opted for Glue was the decentralized management of route tables. And so I'm a software engineer on the infrastructure team, and so we deploy Glue and manage the upgrades of Glue, but all of the actual route tables and upstreams are owned by the various teams, and there's 20 different teams, and let's see, we have like 108 route tables and 70 upstreams and 25 different domains that we're managing. And so it's really great because it means that the manifests for routes are managed by the teams that own the applications. And so along with their application that expose the endpoints, they're also handling the routing. It's been great. It's been a really good experience. And then the other benefit has been the ease of discovery of those paths and those routes using CLI tools and things like that. So it's been a lot better than what we were using before, which was Zool with various groovy filters and things like that. We use the Glue API, and so if we want to continue using it, we either move to enterprise, and I have an assumption that even if we move to enterprise, we likely will need to switch to using the Gateway API for Kubernetes at some point anyway. And so rather than evaluate what we would get out of enterprise, we would rather just move into kgateway. So the situation that we have is we have all these CRDs resources that are managed in a decentralized way in lots of different repos, all synced to our clusters using Argo CD. And we need to transition from using the route tables and upstreams to using HTTP routes and backends, and transition our virtual services to use the kgateway. I can't remember if it's listener or anyway, to use the CRD for gateway. So there's some things that we can do as an infrastructure side to prep for that. We can duplicate all of our pieces, and we already have a blue-green setup. We have a AWS load balancer, and we're using the AWS load balancer controller with the target group bindings so that we can actually just do a transition at the load balancer between Glue installs. And so that's how we handle upgrades with Glue anyway. So we can do that. I think the bigger and heavier piece is providing ways for our users to transition their to have a parallel running of the objects that they maintain in a way that allows us to do a seamless transition. So I have some ideas about what that looks like, but I haven't really seen a lot of discussion in the community about what it looks like for people to transition from an existing stable glue setup, glue edge setup to a kgateway setup. So that's kind of like, that's what I'm here for. So.
Okay, very good. Can I ask a couple of clarification questions? And folks, if you have questions. So if I understood you correctly, it sounds like the main feature you're using is routes and perhaps maybe routes delegation to delegate the routes to the ability to configure routes to your 20 different teams, so the team can be responsible to configure the routes on their own within their own control. It could be maybe a domain or path that you don't have to worry about, so the team would be able to configure. Is that the main feature you are using from Glue?
I would say yes. Like at the moment, that's the heaviest use. We know that we have a lot more features available to us, but we've used traffic shadowing, but it's not something we're actively using. And we've had people ask about doing rate limiting and external auth and that kind of stuff. But we're not currently leveraging those things. So we pretty much have virtual services, upstreams, and route tables in our environment, with not a lot of custom sort of more detailed configuration. I will say that we do some things at the virtual service level to authenticate the traffic from the ALB. But that's like it's a header authentication with a shared secret. So that's not even, that's really simple. So, so yeah, it's actually a very simple setup as far as the way that we're using it. The main issue for us is the transition from using of CRDs in a decentralized environment. So.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I'm taking some notes as we're speaking, so I don't know if I missed anything. Feel free to let me know if I missed anything. I don't think, do we have a migration tool? I don't think we have a migration tool. We talk about we need a migration tool from the classic Glue to Gateway API, but I don't think that work has started. Is that correct? I don't know if anybody on the call has more context to that.
Yeah, we started exploring it, but it's not yet finished. Just to clarify, is your problem, is the delegation currently in kgateway not enough, or is it like rewriting the CRDs?
It's just rewriting CRDs. I think that from what I'm looking at in kgateway, it looks like the same delegation would work because we're just using a label selector, and we define in our virtual service a label selector for attaching route tables to the virtual service, and we defined our own label, which is like a API group, which usually uses a domain. And so in the case of applications that serve endpoints on multiple domains, they would have a route table per sort of route and domain that they would use. So it's a pretty simple way of attaching those route tables to a virtual service. And I think from what I read, it looks like it works the same way for attaching HTTP routes in kgateway.
A very similar way. There's one main difference, that we only support a single label with a predefined key. That's just a performance optimization, because that way we can pre-index the whole delegation chain.
So when you say a single label with a predefined key, like right now in our virtual service, we have API group, and then that has a specific key, and then well, specific value. So the key is API group, and the value is what we actually are looking for. But you're saying that it's a predefined key rather than a label with potentially different values?
So the values can be different, but the key needs to be, I don't remember what it is exactly, but it's something like delegate.kgateway.dev.
Okay. I mean, we could do a trend. I think that's not that would be a factor in how we transition.
Yeah,
But I don't think that's because it really is like this virtual service is collecting all of these route tables that have this exact value on this particular label. So there's not a lot of variation in what the key is. There's no variation in the key. There's only variations in the value now.
Okay, yeah, that's good to hear. So yeah, that should work. Yeah, we started doing the migration, but then we realized, because in parallel we're also working to kind of add features, and Glue just has a lot more features. So we put the migration a bit on pause till we get, because right now we don't have what to migrate to. If that makes sense.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's definitely something we plan to have.
Right, but our use case is we're actually using Glue quite simply, and so we may be able to transition to kgateway pretty cleanly. And I have some ideas, like we can develop a script to do like a transition of just the values, because even our route tables are very simple. And so it's possible that we could just script it, but it would be a script that each team would run in each repo that they own in order to create the new CRDs. So there's things like that, but we would need to have all the infrastructure set up so that we have a parallel kgateway running at the same time, so that we could inspect the end proxy config and that kind of stuff to verify that everything looks like it as it should. So
that's if your usage of Glue is pretty simple. Okay, let me give you some background. The way we plan to have the migration is not using Glue Edge CRDs, but rather using the Envoy config dump. And the reason is because if we use Envoy config dump and generate back CRDs, we can have very strong guarantees that we didn't miss anything. Now, I know in your case, there's not a lot to miss, but we can't just have the migration built on this case. The downside of this approach is that you lose the delegation structure, right? Because in Envoy, it's all,
Yeah, because it's an abstraction.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So Yuval, that's actually the question I was going to ask you. So would you recommend a user like Daniel to use the migration tool, which I think is still under developing, to look at the Envoy configuration and migrate from the classical Glue resource to the Kubernetes Gateway API?
It sounds like we have a bunch of relatively simple CRDs where the main thing is delegation. I'm not sure how effective the migration tool would be here.
If we could represent the delegation in some way. So like right now, it's the delegation is based on domain. Okay, so like the virtual surface itself already is configured with a domain. And then the route table basically has to have something that matches the domain. And right now we're using a label for doing the delegation to do that. So in the resulting Envoy config, because it actually does represent the domain, we could reconstruct the delegation.
Yeah, if it's something that we can infer from the Envoy config, that would be possible. But then again, you're at the same problem where everyone would need to run it, right?
Yeah, that's the other part, is that because we're using the delegation model, the commits that need to be made are in many different repos.
Yeah, it is. So basically, when the tool runs, it doesn't necessarily have the knowledge of whether you have a gigantic route configuration
Yeah.
that's composed
Yeah.
of 20 plus team, or you purposefully have a gigantic route configuration.
Right.
Yeah, I'm going to pass the mic to Lawrence, who has a hand.
Hey, yeah, thanks, Lynn. So it's good to hear, Daniel, that you're a heavy user of route delegation. I'm not surprised to hear that, because that is one of the, the really nice features in the Glue API. Yuval, I'm wondering if, we need to consider that with the migration tool, because I suspect it's not just Daniel's use case. I suspect there's a lot of, like, if you're a Glue user, there's a pretty high chance that you're a delegation user. And so if we're going to miss a big set of functionality, if we go for the config dump model, maybe we need to consider.
So we don't plan to change the usage of config dump, mainly because if you don't do that, it's very easy to miss something, which is a lot worse than miss the structure. What we did think is kind of what Daniel alluded to, is have some sort of schemes for structure, right? We separate by domain, or we separate by path prefix, something like that. Kind of have some rules that define the delegation versus trying to convert the CRDs directly. Because in Glue you can get policies through external CRDs, so it would be basic. If we don't do it from the Envoy config dump, it would be basically re-implementing Glue in terms of migration.
So, and I will say that we are maybe lucky, or we designed this in such a way that there's data that exists in the virtual service that is replicated in the route table, and then shows up in the Envoy config, in that we're using the domain. But that was our choice. We created that label and we populated those values. If we had instead of opted to do team or something like that, then there wouldn't be any way to do that mapping between what's in the Envoy config and what it is that the delegation looks like. And so really I can see how it would be hard to extract what the actual delegation rules are unless they are set up with the domain or something like that. So, yeah. And that was just a choice on our part.
Yeah, that makes sense. I did not do this research, but my understanding from the person who did is that a lot of users have some pattern that we can use.
So I'll just throw out one more thing real quick. There is some precedent for the other model. Again, not suggesting we change it, but maybe an alternative to have an other option. There's like the ingress to gateway tool where you give that's more on a per resource basis, right? So you have an old style ingress API and it turns it into a gateway API resource for you. So that for if you're not trying to migrate the whole structure, but you want to go on a CR basis, on a per custom resource basis, that could be feasible as well.
Right. So I think that from our perspective, we still will need something that I think is going to be run on the per repo. It needs to. I'm trying to feel like, is this per repo? The hard part is that the teams that are using this delegation are often using templates for generating their manifests for the route tables and upstreams. Meaning they're not necessarily committing the manifest directly to their repo. They have a template that's for a Helm chart or something, and they're generating it from their template. And so they would need to basically come up with a template for the backends and HTTP routes that match and generate those also, I think. And so I think that in the end, our process really needs to be basically like take the equivalent CRDs and have templates for them that are added to the repo, and the teams would generate both when they deploy. And so we would have basically every team would have parallel, and our checks or our testing that we have done what we need to do is basically going to be that checking that all the CRDs that we have for route tables exist as HTTP routes, and everything that's an upstream has a backend. So I'm not sure a migration tool is going to help us in our situation because we have the layers of abstraction that we have currently.
Yeah.
Between Glue and the actual things that teams own. So
Yeah. So maybe this is a simple way I'm thinking about naively in your scenario, Daniel. I was thinking like you could have simplify the environment just with one domain, one team, right? Delegate to one team, and then based on this migration tool who look at the Envoy configuration, you can look at how the translation to the gateway resource, and then you probably need to massage that a little bit with the route delegation on your specific key, because I think the label is not configurable for the route delegation, but the value of the label you can configure it for that particular team. So once you figure out a path for a team, like an exemplary team, then you could potentially provide that as a sample to the rest of the 19 or 20 plus teams as, hey, look, we've worked out a process or a golden example of how the teams can migrate one by one, and you can look at this for references. Because I think, like you said, the configuration are not too complex, and most of the time people just need a golden example to follow through.
yeah, actually, fortunately, our Helm charts are actually centrally generated. So we have a Helm chart that most everybody uses. And so if we can identify what that looks like in the main Helm chart, then that actually takes care of most situations, because that same Helm chart's used across many teams. And so we have a way of doing it that way. But I think that for us, we just have to do some work to verify that everything is transitioned, and that we can send traffic to kgateway, and we can do that at the ALB. We can send a percentage of traffic. We can do all this transition in our test environment, and then do the same sort of validation in our production environment. So.
That sounds right. I assume you could have, correct me if I'm wrong here, for people who knows more about Glue than me, you could potentially have Glue side by side with kgateway in the same cluster, maybe deploy in a different namespace, and then you could have the old resources config Glue proxy, and then the new gateway API config the kgateway proxy.
Yeah, we do this. I mean, we do this with our Glue installs now with the blue-green. We have them in separate namespaces. The difference is that they're different objects, and that we already have mechanisms to validate that the traffic is getting there like it should, without it actually being live. And really, our test environment is identical to our production environment, so we can really push it and have it exposed externally fully 50-50 or whatever if we want in order to validate it. So that part I think is pretty straightforward. So I think my main question was really like what does the transition look like? It's good to know that the Envoy config really is the golden sort of, I mean, that's everything results in the Envoy config. So that's really going to be the best comparison. And is that actually a good validation path, is to compare the Envoy config between kgateway and glue edge once we think everything is like as a way to sort of make sure that we're covering everything and it looks the same.
Yeah, I think so. I saw a thumbs up from Lawrence. I assume you agree also. Yeah, because it's the same envoy, right, at the end, and we're just hoping config the same way as well.
Yeah, and actually it's worth probably enforcing that message. Like right now, at least, especially the kgateway envoy is the envoy glue that we built, so that still is in place, and that's
okay.
Like we eventually want to move away from that, but for the immediate term, it's the exact same envoy that the glue project would use. So
okay,
the API is going to be different, right? But like the envoy config, really, like it's just the surface of the API that changes. The actual implementation is the same under the covers.
So we could, if we do this soon enough, whereas it's the same envoy image, then we could actually use a diff type situation between them. Maybe not just a straight diff, but an intelligent diff that doesn't care what order things are in, for comparison to see that we have good coverage of as teams migrate.
Yeah, that sounds good. Well, Daniel, I want to take a minute to thank you for explaining your scenario and, look forward to hear from you. The team is also on, the community is on Slack if you have any questions, and we're pretty fast responsive. So we look forward to help you on the journey to move to kgateway when you have time, for sure. I understand all these migration takes time, but we're here to help if you need anything. If you discover
Thank you. This
gaps.
is really helpful to me. So.
Okay, cool. We have one extra item on the agenda. I want to run through that quickly. I think this is the one we don't currently have anybody assigned, but one of the users in the community recently asked for support for this to be able to support file or SDS-based certification type. So if anybody interested in contributing to this item, please mention your interest either on Slack or on the GitHub. We would really love to get it rolling with this feature. All right, I think that's all we have. Does anyone have anything before we start?
Yeah, then I had one question.
Yeah.
We as you know, like we have like Han, our project manager. She has some cycles and could help out with just organizing issues in the repo. I think there is we could get the milestones updated better to what is actually getting burned down and worked on, and just make sure at least with the resources we're committing towards it, make sure it's represented in the open source repo. I think there's also some room to clean up and groom through old issues that carried over from Glue as well, and make sure our good first issues are like well groomed, so it's easy for people coming in from the community to like know what to know what's valuable to pick up. So I was curious if I was looking at our contributors like guidelines and tiers. I was curious if we had any thoughts on like a project management contributor role or anything like that, or if you've done that before.
That's a great question. I think right now, I assume she doesn't have sufficient GitHub access at the moment to do any project management.
Yes.
Okay, I would love her to maybe become a member first, then we can consider give her access to some of the project management. I think our bar for member is pretty low. Lawrence, go ahead.
I was just going to say, we'd actually talked about this in the past, and I think one of the things, so yeah, we needed to be a member for sure, but I think there's also like, we talked about introducing a role that's for project management. So it doesn't even necessarily have to be Han, but the bar to get to say maintainer is not, it takes effort to get there, and as it should, right?
Yeah.
But to do, grooming or refinement of the issues and milestones and so on, I think it makes sense to have like a separate role for that. So that way, we have a plan in place and a process in place for how folks can get to that role as well.
Yeah. Looking at some of the other projects, I don't know if we want to spend energy to, formalize the process, because the role doesn't really have commit access to approved code. I think our bar can be relatively low, because for instance, like in Israel, we don't have a process for how you become a project manager. So I don't want to invent process when we don't need it. So once she become a member, I think I would feel pretty comfortable just give her access to do project management. That would be my take. Oh, right, Jenny, thanks for weighing. So basically when she becomes a member, she will have triage access too.
Okay, sounds good. So the bar to become a member then is just like one merged PR.
Yeah,
And
so we'll be able to do pretty fast.
That could even be docs or
Exactly.
stuff like that. Yep.
Yep. All right. Good question, Josh. I'll record that in the meeting minutes. Thanks everybody for joining. Talk to you soon. Bye.